Welcome to our 1968 presidential election coverage. Tonight we'll be covering the final step of the 1968 election season, the general election itself. Tonight we have two candidates as always. On the Democratic side we have Robert Kennedy, the senator from New York and former Attorney General. He's also the brother of late President John F. Kennedy, who was unfortunately assassinated back in 1963. On the Republican side we have former Vice President Richard Nixon of California, who actually lost to Robert Kennedy's late brother back in the 1960 election. Nixon, of course, is aiming for a comeback after returning to politics. Let's check out some of our popular vote polls. As you can see in the popular vote, not the electoral vote, Robert Kennedy leads narrowly over Richard Nixon, 47% to 45%. But as you can see, about 8% of Americans have not made up their minds, so Richard Nixon is relying on a large amount of them to break for him in the final stage of the election. And in polling data for the Electoral College, Robert Kennedy is actually behind Richard Nixon with 170 electoral votes projected to go to him, and Richard Nixon has 188 electoral votes projected to go to him. The rest are currently considered toss-ups. And we have our 7 p.m. poll closings from several states, mostly in the eastern coast of the United States. Out of Vermont, 3 electoral votes will easily go to Richard Nixon. Out of Virginia, 12 electoral votes will go to Richard Nixon. And out of Kentucky, 9 electoral votes will go to the former vice president. And in Georgia, it is too close to call, while Richard Nixon has an early lead over Robert Kennedy. And in South Carolina, Robert Kennedy actually has the early lead now of about 2%. And in Indiana, it is statistically tied between the two candidates. And on the road to 270, Richard Nixon is the only one with electoral votes with 24, while Robert Kennedy has not gained any yet. And now it's 7:30 p.m. poll closings. We have some poll closings from the key swing states of Ohio and North Carolina. Out of West Virginia, we can project that 7 electoral votes will go to Robert Kennedy. This is a Democratic stronghold after all, and Kennedy will easily take its 7 electoral votes. Out of Ohio, Robert Kennedy has the early lead of about 4% over Nixon. And in North Carolina, Robert Kennedy has an even bigger lead of about 6% over Nixon. And on the road to 270, Robert Kennedy has gained electoral votes, of course, in the state of West Virginia. It is now 7 to 24. Of course, Nixon is favored. And at 8 p.m., we have a large batch of poll closings from key swing states such as Florida, Illinois, and Pennsylvania. Out of Massachusetts, 14 electoral votes will easily go to Robert Kennedy. This is actually where the state he was born in, though he is a senator from New York. And out of Rhode Island, 4 electoral votes to Kennedy. And Connecticut, 8 electoral votes to RFK, and Washington, D.C., 3 electoral votes to Kennedy. Out of Oklahoma, 8 electoral votes will go to Nixon. Out of New Hampshire, 4 electoral votes to the former vice president. And Tennessee, 11 electoral votes to Richard Nixon. Out of Alabama, 10 electoral votes to Richard Nixon. And out of Mississippi, 7 electoral votes to Richard Nixon. He's currently sweeping the South so far. And as you can see in Illinois, it is too close to call with 4% separating the two candidates. Richard Nixon is currently in the lead. And out of Maine, it is too close to call with Robert Kennedy having an early lead of about 2%. And in New Jersey, Robert Kennedy has forged an early lead of about 5% in this key swing state with about 17 electoral votes, key to victory. And Delaware, 3 electoral votes, Richard Nixon has the lead. And in Maryland, the home state of Richard Nixon's vice presidential candidate, Spiro Agnew, the governor, Richard Nixon actually has about a 3% lead over Robert Kennedy. And in Florida, it is statistically tied. And in Missouri, 2% separates two candidates. Robert Kennedy has the lead. And in Pennsylvania, another lead for Richard Nixon of about 3%. And as you can see on the road to 270, Robert Kennedy is doing very well in the northeast of America, while Richard Nixon is doing very well in the southern region of America. And we have 8:30 p.m. poll closings from the state of Arkansas. Out of Arkansas, 6 electoral votes will easily go to Richard Nixon's column. Surprising, this state used to be a solid Democratic state that even John F. Kennedy did quite well in back in 1960. And as you can see, only Arkansas has changed, but Richard Nixon now has 6 more electoral votes to his total. And at 9 p.m., we have a large batch of key poll closings from states like Texas and Wisconsin, key swing states, also Robert Kennedy's home state of New York. And New York, just mentioned before, Robert Kennedy's home state, 43 electoral votes, the biggest state in the Union, of course, and most electoral votes will go to Robert Kennedy. He's quite popular here, so it's no surprise that he will win this large amount of electoral votes. And out of Minnesota, 10 electoral votes to Kennedy, along with Michigan, 21 electoral votes to Robert Kennedy. And in Wyoming, 3 electoral votes to Richard Nixon. And out of North Dakota, 4 electoral votes to Richard Nixon, and the same with South Dakota, another 4 electoral votes going to the GOP column. Out of Nebraska, 5 electoral votes will go to the former vice president, and in Kansas, 7 electoral votes will go to Nixon. And Louisiana, 10 electoral votes, another state in the South, giving its electoral votes to Richard Nixon despite being a Democratic stronghold only a few cycles ago. And in Colorado, 6 electoral votes to Richard Nixon, along with New Mexico, 4 electoral votes to the former vice president. And in Texas, this is Robert Kennedy's running mate, John Connally, who is the governor of Texas and ally of Lyndon Johnson, the current president. Robert Kennedy is currently leading here, and it's undeniable that support from Connally is actually helping him here. And in Wisconsin, Robert Kennedy has another early lead of about 3%. And as you can see, the electoral map has been certainly updated. A large amount of states in the Midwest have been filled out, especially rural states. Richard Nixon has a 3 electoral vote lead over Robert Kennedy. Of course, Richard Nixon has 113, and Kennedy has 110. And at 10:30 p.m., we have a few poll closings out of some more western states. Utah will easily give its electoral votes to Richard Nixon, a Republican stronghold. And Montana, 4 electoral votes will go to Richard Nixon. Out of Arizona, 5 electoral votes towards Richard Nixon. And Indiana, this is one of our first swing state projections, 13 electoral votes to Richard Nixon, despite the fact that Robert Kennedy did win this state in the Democratic primary. It will fall into the GOP category. And North Carolina, another 13 electoral votes for Richard Nixon, a state that Robert Kennedy tried to contest as much as possible, yet it is still following the Southern curse, as some in the Democratic Party are calling it, though as the GOP calls it, the Southern strategy, which Richard Nixon designed. And of course, that strategy was meant to target many of the old guard Democratic voters who supported more conservative social policies that Richard Nixon also supports. So Robert Kennedy's support for civil rights has lost him a lot of voters in this category. And in South Carolina, the other Carolina will give us 8 electoral votes towards Richard Nixon. In Iowa, 9 electoral votes towards the former vice president. And Maryland, this is Spiro Agnow's home state, 10 electoral votes will go to Robert Kennedy, another northeastern state, giving its votes to Kennedy. Along with Delaware and New Jersey, those 2 states together have 20 electoral votes, not including Maryland, of course, and they will give their votes to the senator from New York. And Georgia, even though we saw both Carolinas giving their votes to Richard Nixon, this state is breaking the trend, and with support from many of the old guard Democratic voters who were convinced by John Connally to vote for Robert Kennedy, and of course another combined support of Kennedy's coalition, which included minorities, actually has given Kennedy Georgia's 12 electoral votes in a narrow victory. And in Nevada, it is too close to call. Richard Nixon has an early lead. And as you can see on the road to 270, Richard Nixon is filling out the South, but John F. Kennedy has been able to take the state of Georgia and much of the Northeast. Richard Nixon has also done very well in the Midwest and more of the rural states, while Robert Kennedy has done well in some of the upper Midwest like Minnesota and Michigan, and is doing pretty well in Illinois and Missouri as of now. And we have the 11 p.m. poll closings, mostly states from the Pacific Coast, including California, a very large state. And Washington will give its 9 electoral votes to Robert Kennedy, a very liberal state actually, so it is no surprise that Robert Kennedy will gain its 9 electoral votes. And Hawaii, 4 electoral votes towards Kennedy. And we can also project that Texas's 25 electoral votes, a very big prize, will go to Robert Kennedy, undeniably the support of John Connally, the Texas governor who is very popular there. Robert Kennedy will squeak out a victory here, denying Nixon the victory of the state. And as you can see, Idaho, 4 electoral votes to Richard Nixon, no big surprise here. And in Florida, just as Texas was giving its votes to Kennedy, Florida has given its votes to Richard Nixon. While a far smaller win for Richard Nixon, it still cements his status as a very good candidate for the South. And in Maine, 4 electoral votes will go to Richard Nixon. he is actually gaining ground a little bit in the Northeast among many of those voters. Well, even though Kennedy has done very well there, Maine has still kept itself out of his grasp. And in California, it's too close to call. This is actually Richard Nixon's home state. He was a senator here before he became vice president. Currently, the former senator from here, Richard Nixon, of course, has a 6% lead. And Oregon, Richard Nixon has another early lead. Robert Kennedy actually lost the state in the Democratic primary to Eugene McCarthy, so he doesn't have a lot of support from the Democratic voters here, which could cost him. On the road to 270 map, Richard Nixon has a mere 1 electoral vote lead over Robert Kennedy. It is 191 for Nixon to 190 for Kennedy. And we have our 1 a.m. poll closing from the state of Alaska. Alaska is too close to call. Richard Nixon has a pretty early lead here, and we expect that to hold as Alaska is a pretty Republican state, even though it went to Lyndon Johnson back in 1964. And in Nevada, we can project this state's 4 electoral votes will go to Richard Nixon. This is a swing state projection for the GOP. And in Iowa, we already called the state by accident, sorry about that. And Wisconsin, 12 electoral votes will go to Richard Nixon. This is a big win for him, showing that he can still win in states in the Midwest that Robert Kennedy was doing well in. This is a pretty big loss for the senator from New York and a big win for Nixon. And Illinois is actually quite a big loss for Nixon, just as we were saying that Robert Kennedy has gone and won Illinois' 26 electoral votes. This was a key win for Robert Kennedy in one of the states that he needed to win on his pathway to victory. And as you can see on the 270 to win map, Robert Kennedy has taken the lead with 216 electoral votes, while Richard Nixon is 10 electoral votes behind with 206. We have a projection to make. Oregon will give its 6 electoral votes to Richard Nixon. Not a big surprise here, but still, a win is a win, and Richard Nixon's camp is celebrating tonight. And out of Alaska, 3 electoral votes will go to Richard Nixon. This is actually a flip from 1964, as we mentioned earlier. Lyndon Johnson won the state in his landslide against Barry Goldwater. And in Pennsylvania, Richard Nixon has taken a lead of about 1%, while Robert Kennedy is banking on strong turnout from Philadelphia to give him the state. And in Missouri, 3% separates 2 candidates. Robert Kennedy has forged his lead. He's trying to do very well here, especially among the urban population. And in Ohio, it is statistically tied 50% to 50%. And in California, Robert Kennedy is behind by about 2%. Richard Nixon has 49, though Kennedy has actually narrowed the gap a bit and is catching up to the former senator from the state. And as you can see, Richard Nixon is now 1 electoral vote behind Kennedy, as he won several states, including Oregon and Alaska, 9 electoral votes combined, which put him up right behind Kennedy. Kennedy's certainly worried right now, especially his camp, as Richard Nixon is right in their rearview mirror. And Robert Kennedy, we can project this state for him. Missouri, 12 electoral votes will go to Robert Kennedy. This is a massive win for him. He needed this state to win, and along with Illinois and Michigan and Minnesota, this shows that Robert Kennedy is doing very well in the Midwest, and hopefully he can continue this trend for him and states like Pennsylvania and Ohio. Just as we said Pennsylvania, we can now project this state for Robert Kennedy. A big win of 29 electoral votes will go to the senator from New York. And as you can see, Robert Kennedy is a mere 13 electoral votes away from victory. He only needs 1 of the remaining states to win, either Ohio or California. Richard Nixon needs both states to win, putting him at the disadvantage currently. And in California, Richard Nixon has actually expanded his lead in the state. It's about 4% right now. Here we can actually see the map, county map of California. While Robert Kennedy is doing better than expected in Los Angeles and San Francisco, he still isn't doing very great in the Bay Area and needs to bump up his numbers there. But that is really where his base of support is. And actually, we can show Robert Kennedy's county map from his win here in the state back in the Democratic primary, where there's actually an assassination attempt against him. Robert Kennedy beat Eugene McCarthy in the state with actually a pretty similar coalition that he has to that of which he has now against Nixon. He's doing very well in the urban bases in the Bay Area, though not as well in the northern areas of the state and suburbs. Out of Ohio, Robert Kennedy actually has a 2% lead, much better than California. The county map for this actually shows a few key things. Robert Kennedy is doing pretty well in the urban areas and in the working class areas, especially in the eastern portions of the state and the northern portions of the state. He currently has about a 200,000 vote lead over Richard Nixon, so it is pretty close. And we actually have a key race alert, as you will see on the screen shortly. We have a pretty big projection to make. Let's see what it is. Ohio will give us 26 electoral votes towards Richard Nixon. This is a big win for him. Just as we said, Robert Kennedy was leading. A big boost from many of the rural and suburban populations of the state has given Richard Nixon the lead, and we're confident enough to project this state's 26 electoral votes towards the former vice president. This is a big loss for Robert Kennedy. And here is the map. As you can see, Robert Kennedy and Richard Nixon both need to win the state of California, as again, Ohio was called for Nixon. Both campaigns are eagerly awaiting results, and many pundits wait with bated breath to see the results. And in California, here's our current standing. Robert Kennedy is a mere 10,000 votes away from Richard Nixon. It is a squeaky margin here, and we'll see who will win. And we have a major projection to make. As you will see here, is a key race projection, meaning that we know who the next president of the United States will be. That will be the 36th president of the USA. Either it will be Robert Kennedy, hoping to reclaim his brother's legacy and take back the White House, continue to hold the White House for the Democrats, or Richard Nixon, making a comeback in politics after his devastating defeat back 8 years earlier in 1960. And the President of the United States, President-elect, soon to be president in January, is Robert Kennedy. The senator from New York and former Attorney General has essentially reclaimed the Kennedy legacy and is bringing it back to the White House. Robert Kennedy will be the next president of the United States, and you can definitely tell what this projection will be, and we'll show you that one shortly. And here it is. California's 40 electoral votes will go to Robert Kennedy. It is quite a surprise here, as Richard Nixon was leading by quite a large margin, and we'll show you how Kennedy won. As you can see, Robert Kennedy boosted up his margins in Los Angeles and San Francisco, getting insane urban turnout that is relatively unseen for most Democratic candidates. He also boosted up his margins in some of the suburban areas, and especially in the Bay Area. Actually, as you can see, many Hispanics gave their support to Robert Kennedy after he campaigned heavily there with Cesar Chavez, a labor activist, and that gave him many of their votes. So currently, Kennedy actually has around 200,000, almost 250,000 votes over Richard Nixon, but we are still confident enough to project this state for Robert Kennedy. He will be the next president of the United States, the 36th president to be exact, and the Democrats will hold this state, the White House for themselves and hold the state, as Lyndon Johnson did win it back in 1964. And here we can see the final map. Robert Kennedy has 297 electoral votes and Richard Nixon has 241. Kennedy came from behind to win California, and while Richard Nixon did the same thing in Ohio, all that matters is that Kennedy has surpassed the magic number of 270, as you can see on your screen above. Robert Kennedy held on to a few key southern states while losing many others. For example, he won Texas and Georgia, but lost Florida, Louisiana, Arkansas, and North the Carolinas. He also did pretty well in the Midwest, for example, winning Illinois, Missouri, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, and in the Northeast, practically filling out the eastern seaboard except for Maine. Meanwhile, Richard Nixon did very well in states like Oregon, which was pretty contested, along with Alaska, Indiana, Wisconsin, and Ohio. He also gained some southern states that we mentioned earlier and held on to many of the Republican ground in the Midwest. But of course, that was not enough to give him a victory, and Robert Kennedy will become the 36th president of the United States in late January, of course, of 1969. So that's it, everyone. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like and subscribe for more content. Hit the notification bell so you can be notified when more videos like this come out. This is probably my favorite video to make, and thank you to those who actually gave me the graphics for this. And I'll leave a link in the description for their channel, and of course, and maybe a pinned comment as well. So yeah, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.